The crack of a pistol echoed through the Montana mountain pass as Cordelia Nash fired a warning shot into the crisp autumn air of 1878. Her heart raced not from fear but from frustration as she watched her wagon's wooden axle splinter beneath the weight of her possessions. Everything she owned in this world lay in that wagon, her ticket to a new life in Silver City, where her late father's mining claim awaited her claim. Damnation, she muttered, pulling her woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders. The September wind whispered through the pines, carrying the first chill of the coming winter. At 24, Cordelia had weathered enough hardships to know that panic would serve no purpose. Still, as the sun began its descent behind the jagged peaks, her predicament grew increasingly dire. She assessed her situation with practical eyes. The pass was known to be treacherous, especially at night, with steep drops on one side and sheer rock face on the other. Wolves had been howling in the distance since dusk fell. Her food supplies would last 3 days at most, and her canteen was already half empty. The sound of hooves against stone made her reach again for her father's Colt revolver. She squinted into the gathering darkness, watching as a lone rider emerged from around the bend. His silhouette was unmistakably that of a cowboy, broad-shouldered and straight-backed in the saddle. "Afternoon, madam," the stranger called, his voice carrying easily across the distance between them. "Seems you've got yourself in a tight spot." "Nothing I can't handle," Cordelia replied, keeping her pistol visible but lowered. She'd learned long ago that showing weakness in the territories was as dangerous as showing fear to a wild animal. The rider approached slowly, hands visible on his saddle horn. As he came into clearer view, Cordelia could make out a strong-jawed face partially obscured by several days' worth of stubble. His eyes were a startling blue against his sun-bronzed skin. "Name's Reese Zimmerman," he said, tipping his hat. "Ranch hand from the Double Creek spread about 15 miles west." His gaze shifted to her broken wagon, assessing the damage with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen his fair share of trail mishaps. "Cordelia Nash," she offered after a moment's hesitation, "headed to Silver City." Reese dismounted with the easy grace of a man who'd spent more time in a saddle than on solid ground. He approached the wagon and crouched to examine the splintered axle. "This isn't something that can be fixed without proper tools, Miss Nash." "And Silver City's still a good 2 days' journey from here," Cordelia sighed, knowing he was right but unwilling to admit defeat. "I'll make camp and figure something out come morning." Reese stood, brushing dust from his hands. "These mountains get mighty cold at night, and there's been talk of renegade outlaws working these passes." He gestured toward the darkening sky. "The wagon axle snapped in the pass. You'll ride with me till morning. I know a safe spot about an hour from here. Come daylight, we can return with tools to fix your wagon or arrange for transport to Silver City." Cordelia bristled at his directive tone. "Mr. Zimmerman, I appreciate the offer, but I'm perfectly capable." A distant howl cut through the air, closer than the previous ones. Reese's expression remained unchanged, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Those wolves are hunting, Miss Nash, and they're not the only predators in these mountains." His tone softened. "I'm not suggesting you abandon your belongings. We can secure the wagon and return at first light." Cordelia weighed her options quickly. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford if it meant risking her life. "Very well, Mr. Zimmerman, but I insist on returning at dawn." As they worked to secure her wagon, Cordelia couldn't help but notice the efficiency of Reese's movements. He worked without wasted motion, tying down the canvas covering with knots that would withstand any curious animal or sudden storm. "Been on the trail long?" he asked as they finished. 3 weeks from Denver," she replied. "My father passed last spring, left me a claim near Silver City." Reese nodded, helping her gather the essentials she'd need for the night. "Mining claim?" "Yes, the Silverado. Father wrote that it was promising." She didn't mention that the claim was all she had left after settling her father's debts. Or that without its success, her future was as uncertain as the shifting Montana sky. As Reese helped her mount his horse, positioning himself behind her in the saddle, Cordelia felt an unexpected flutter of awareness. It had been a long time since she'd been this close to a man, especially one whose quiet competence both reassured and unsettled her. "Hold steady," he instructed, his breath warm against her ear as he reached around her for the reins. His chest was solid against her back, and she fought the ridiculous impulse to lean into that strength. They rode in silence for a time, the rhythmic movement of the horse beneath them and the vast canopy of stars above creating a strange intimacy in the wilderness. Cordelia found herself relaxing incrementally, her body adjusting to the proximity of this stranger whose help she had little choice but to accept. "What brings a ranch hand so far from his herd?" she asked eventually, needing to break the silence. "Tracking a mountain lion that's been troubling our cattle," Reese replied. "Lost the trail about noon and was heading back when I spotted your wagon." "Fortunate timing for me," Cordelia acknowledged. "Perhaps for both of us," he said, his voice holding a note she couldn't quite interpret. "Not many travel this pass alone. I've found that necessity often makes companions of things most would avoid," she said. Solitude included. Reese's soft chuckle rumbled against her back. "Well said, Miss Nash." As promised, within the hour they arrived at a small clearing sheltered by a rock outcropping. A natural spring bubbled nearby, its soft gurgling a welcome counterpoint to the night sounds of the wilderness. Reese dismounted first, then extended his hands to help Cordelia down. The brief contact as his hands spanned her waist sent an unexpected warmth through her, despite the chill in the air. He set about making camp with practiced efficiency, starting a small fire and laying out bedrolls one on each side of the flames. The gesture of respect wasn't lost on Cordelia, who had braced herself for a more presumptuous attitude from a man who'd essentially rescued her. As they shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack from Reese's saddlebags, supplemented with the last of Cordelia's apple preserves, she found herself studying him across the dancing flames. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, his features were too weathered, his expression too guarded for that, but there was something compelling about his quiet self-assurance. "Tell me about Silver City," he said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "What awaits you there besides your father's claim?" Cordelia hesitated, unused to sharing her plans. "A fresh start," she finally said. "My mother died when I was young, and father raised me while chasing one mining prospect after another across Colorado. Never struck it rich, but never stopped believing the next claim would be the one." She smiled faintly. "He always said I inherited his optimism and my mother's practicality. Sounds like a fortunate combination." "It served me well enough," she admitted. "After he died, I taught school in Denver for a time, but..." She trailed off, unwilling to share how the school board had dismissed her after she'd refused the unwanted attentions of the mayor's son. Silver City represents opportunity, independence. Reese nodded, respecting her reluctance to elaborate. "The territory can be hard on those seeking independence," he observed, "especially women on their own." "Are you suggesting I'm ill-prepared for the challenge, Mr. Zimmerman?" Her tone cooled noticeably. "Not at all." His smile was unexpected, transforming his serious face. "Any woman who travels alone through mountain passes with a loaded Colt isn't lacking in preparation or courage." The compliment, delivered without flattery, warmed Cordelia more than the fire before them. "And what about you? Has ranching always been your calling?" Something flickered in his eyes, a shadow of some past pain quickly concealed. "No, I came west after the war, spent time as an Army scout, then rode with a cattle outfit up from Texas. Ranching suits me well enough now. The war." It explained much about his vigilant demeanor, the way he positioned himself with clear sightlines even at rest. She wondered which battles he'd seen, what horrors he carried, but knew better than to ask. The war had left its mark on so many men, creating a brotherhood of silence around memories too painful to revisit. As night deepened around them, their conversation drifted to lighter topics: the beauty of Montana's landscape, the characters one encountered in frontier towns, the books they'd both read. Cordelia was surprised to discover that the weathered cowboy had a fondness for Shakespeare, having carried a dog-eared copy of the collected works through his Army days. "Most wouldn't expect a ranch hand to quote The Tempest," she observed, smiling. Most don't look beyond the dust and the saddle soars, he replied, his eyes meeting hers across the flames. We all contain multitudes, Miss Nash. The intensity of his gaze made her look away first, suddenly aware of the intimacy of their situation alone beneath the vast Montana sky, sharing confidences as if they were old friends rather than chance-met strangers. We should rest, she said, pulling her blanket closer. Dawn comes early in the mountains. Reese nodded, banking the fire before settling onto his bedroll. Sleep well, Miss Nash. We've a busy day ahead. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Cordelia for a time. She found herself listening to Reese's steady breathing across the fire, wondering at the strange twist of fate that had placed her in the care of this quiet, complex man. Eventually, the gentle chorus of night sounds lulled her into slumber. She woke once in the darkest hours, momentarily disoriented. The fire had burned low and the mountain air had grown bitter with cold. Through half-closed eyes, she saw Reese sitting upright, rifle across his knees, his gaze scanning the darkness beyond their camp. The silhouette of his profile against the starlit sky struck her as both reassuring and lonely, a man accustomed to standing watch while others slept. Dawn arrived in a wash of pale gold light that transformed the rugged landscape. Cordelia rose to find coffee already brewing over a freshly built fire and Reese nowhere in sight. His horse remained tethered nearby, so she knew he hadn't abandoned her. Still, a flutter of unease passed through her until she spotted him returning from the direction of the spring, water canteens in hand. "Good morning," he greeted her, his voice rough with the early hour. "Thought you might appreciate coffee before we head back to your wagon." "You thought correctly," she replied with a grateful smile, accepting the tin cup he offered. The coffee was strong and bitter, but the warmth was welcome against the morning chill. "Thank you for keeping watch," he shrugged off her gratitude. Force of habit. They broke camp efficiently, working together as if they'd done so many times before. Cordelia found herself appreciating the easy rhythm they established, accomplishing necessary tasks without needless conversation. By the time the sun had fully crested the eastern peaks, they were mounted and heading back toward her stranded wagon. The return journey seemed shorter, the mountain pass less foreboding in the clear light of morning. As they rounded the final bend, Cordelia felt a surge of relief at seeing her wagon still securely covered, apparently untouched by predators human or animal. Her relief was short-lived, however. As they drew closer, Reese suddenly reined in, his body tensing against her back. "Something's not right," he murmured, his voice pitched low. "The ground's been disturbed." Now that he mentioned it, Cordelia could see fresh hoofprints in the dirt around her wagon, at least 3 horses, judging by the overlapping tracks. Outlaws. She whispered, her hand instinctively moving toward her pistol. "Possibly." Reese's eyes narrowed as he scanned the surrounding cliffs and trees. "Or claim jumpers headed to the same area as you. Either way, they've been and gone." He urged his horse forward cautiously, approaching the wagon from an angle that kept the rocky cliff face at their back. When they reached the wagon, the extent of the violation became clear. The canvas covering had been sliced open, and while the heavier items remained, Cordelia's trunk of personal belongings had been ransacked, its contents scattered across the ground. She dismounted quickly, heart pounding as she surveyed the damage. Most of her clothing was still there, though mudded from being tossed aside. The small wooden box containing her mother's cameo and her father's pocket watch was intact, having been hidden beneath the wagon seat. But the leather pouch containing her savings, nearly $300 that represented her future in Silver City, was gone. "They've taken my money," she said, her voice flat with shock and anger. "Everything I had to start over." Reese knelt beside her, his expression grim as he examined a distinctive boot print in the mud. "Looks like the work of the Blackwater gang. They've been working these mountains for months, mostly targeting miners and supply wagons." Cordelia sat heavily on a nearby rock, the magnitude of her situation crashing down on her. Without those funds, she couldn't purchase the supplies needed to work her father's claim, couldn't secure lodgings in Silver City while she established herself. The dream of independence that had sustained her through the long journey west suddenly seemed as broken as her wagon axle. "What will you do?" Reese asked quietly, watching her with those perceptive blue eyes. She straightened her shoulders, refusing to surrender to despair. "Continue to Silver City. The claim is still mine, and I still have my hands and my wits." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "I won't be the first person to arrive in a mining town with nothing but determination." A smile tugged at the corner of Reese's mouth. "No, you certainly won't be." He stood, surveying the wagon. "The axle can be repaired. I have tools at my camp not far from here. We can salvage enough of your belongings to make the journey, and I know these mountains well enough to avoid any further encounters with the Blackwater boys. You'd help me?" Cordelia asked, surprised by his continued offer of assistance. "I started this journey with you, Miss Nash. Seems only right I see it through." There was something in his steady gaze that convinced Cordelia this wasn't merely courtesy or chivalry. For reasons she couldn't fully articulate, she trusted this man she'd known less than a day. "Very well, Mr. Zimmerman. I accept your help, and I promise to repay your kindness once I'm established. Let's focus on getting you to Silver City first," he replied pragmatically. "Gather what you need for a few days. We'll head to my camp where I have tools and a spare wagon axle. From there, we can make repairs and continue your journey." As they worked to salvage her most essential belongings, Cordelia realized that despite the robbery, her spirits remained unbroken. Perhaps it was the clear mountain air, or perhaps it was the quiet confidence of the man working alongside her, but she felt a strange sense that this setback was merely part of a larger journey, one that might lead to unexpected destinations. By midday, they had secured her most valuable possessions to Reese's saddle and were headed west toward his camp. The rugged landscape opened before them, vast and beautiful in its wild simplicity. Riding double with Reese, Cordelia found herself increasingly aware of his physical presence, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the subtle shifts of his muscles as he guided the horse over difficult terrain. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, partly to distract herself from their proximity. "You mentioned Double Creek. It's not my ranch," he clarified. "Belongs to a man named Harland Walsh. Good employer, fair wages. We run about 2,000 head of cattle on land that stretches from the foothills to the river valley. And you're content there, as a ranch hand." She felt rather than saw his shrug. "It's honest work. The men I ride with are decent sorts, and Walsh doesn't ask questions about a man's past." The implication that he had a past that invited questions hung between them, but Cordelia didn't press. Everyone who came west carried their own reasons, their own secrets. "And what about you, Miss Nash?" he asked after a while. "Is it just the claim that draws you to Silver City or something more?" Cordelia considered her answer carefully. "When my father died, I realized I'd spent my entire life following his dreams. Teaching in Denver was respectable work, but it wasn't my choice, merely what circumstance dictated." She paused, trying to articulate feelings she'd barely acknowledged to herself. "The claim represents something that's truly mine, a chance to build something that belongs to me alone. Freedom," Reese said simply. "Yes, exactly that." They rode in companionable silence for a time, each lost in their own thoughts. The sun climbed higher, warming the air despite the elevation. Birds wheeled overhead, their cries the only interruption to the quiet rhythm of hoofbeats and the occasional snort from Reese's patient mount. By late afternoon, they crested a ridge that afforded them a sweeping view of the valley below. Nestled against the base of the western mountains, Cordelia could make out a cluster of buildings that comprised Reese's ranch. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, and in the distance, she could see the dark shapes of cattle grazing in green pastures. "Double Creek," Reese announced, "named for the two streams that join at the northern edge of the property." As they descended toward the ranch, Cordelia felt an unexpected flutter of nervousness. She would be an object of curiosity to the ranch hands, a strange woman arriving with one of their own. Her appearance after days on the trail was hardly presentable, her green traveling dress dusty and wrinkled, her hair escaping its pins. Reese seemed to sense her unease. Walsh's wife, Margaret, is a kind woman. She'll make you welcome while I gather what we need for your wagon." True to his word, when they rode into the ranch yard, they were met not with suspicion, but with the practical hospitality of frontier folk. Margaret Walsh, a handsome woman in her 50s with iron gray hair and keen eyes, took one look at Cordelia's travel-worn state and promptly whisked her away to the main house for a hot bath and clean clothes. "Any friend of Reese's is welcome here," she said matter-of-factly, showing Cordelia to a small but comfortable bedroom. "He doesn't often bring company back to the ranch, so you must be someone special." "We're not." "That is, we only just met yesterday," Cordelia explained hastily, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "My wagon broke down in the pass, and Mr. Zimmerman offered assistance." Margaret's knowing smile suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. Reese is a man of few words but decisive actions. "If he chose to help you, he saw something worth helping." She patted Cordelia's arm. "Rest now, dinner's at 6 and you can tell us all about your journey then." Left alone, Cordelia sank gratefully onto the bed, overwhelmed by the sudden transition from wilderness survival to civilized comforts. The room was simple but well-appointed, with a copper washbasin, a small writing desk, and curtains that fluttered in the afternoon breeze. Through the window, she could see the ranch spread out before her, a world of order and industry carved from the wild Montana landscape. A soft knock at the door preceded the arrival of a young ranch hand bearing a copper-hip bath and buckets of steaming water. More followed in quick succession, and soon Cordelia was luxuriating in her first proper bath since leaving Denver. The hot water eased the aches of hard travel, and the lavender-scented soap Margaret had provided felt like an extravagant indulgence after weeks of making do with Cold Creek water and harsh lye soap. By the time she dressed in the clean clothes, Margaret had loaned her a simple blue cotton dress that was a touch too large, but blessedly, clean Cordelia felt renewed in body if not in spirit. The loss of her savings still weighed heavily, but the immediate comfort of her surroundings provided temporary respite from worry. Dinner was served in the ranch house's spacious dining room, where Cordelia found herself seated at a long table with Harland and Margaret Walsh, Reese, and several of the senior ranch hands. The meal was simple but abundant: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables from Margaret's kitchen garden. Harland Walsh proved to be as genial as his wife, a robust man in his 60s with a weathered face and shrewd eyes that missed nothing. He listened attentively as Cordelia explained her journey and destination, offering practical advice about Silver City and its surroundings. "The mining district's seen better days," he told her, "but there's still good silver to be had if you know where to look." "What was your father's claim called again?" "The Silverado," Cordelia replied. "He wrote that it showed promise but needed proper development." Harland exchanged a quick glance with Reese. "I know of it. Lies just north of town in what they call the Crystal Ridge. Been some disputes in that area recently, boundary questions, water rights." "Is my claim at risk?" Cordelia asked, alarmed. "Not if your paperwork's in order," Walsh assured her. "But mining territories attract ambitious men, not all of whom respect the law when it conflicts with their interests." "All the more reason for me to reach Silver City quickly," Cordelia said with determination. "I need to establish my presence and rights before anyone can challenge them." "Reese tells me your wagon needs repairs," Walsh said. "He's welcome to whatever supplies he needs. The Double Creek stands behind its people." "That's very generous, Mr. Walsh, but I intend to repay all expenses once I'm established." Walsh waved away her concerns. "Consider it an investment in good neighboring. Silver City's only a day's hard ride from here. We do business with the merchants there regularly." The conversation turned to ranch matters after that, giving Cordelia an opportunity to observe Reese among his colleagues. He spoke little, but was clearly respected by the others, who deferred to his judgment on questions of grazing lands and herd management. There was an easy camaraderie among the men that spoke of shared hardships and mutual trust. After dinner, while the men retired to the porch with pipes and coffee, Margaret invited Cordelia to join her in the kitchen. "Men's talk gets tedious," she confided with a wink. "All cattle and weather, I'd rather hear more about you, my dear. As they washed dishes together, Cordelia insisting on helping despite Margaret's protests, the older woman shared stories of her 30 years on the Double Creek, having come west as a young bride when the ranch was nothing but a crude cabin and a few dozen head of cattle. It wasn't easy, she admitted. Winters that seemed endless, summers so dry we prayed for rain until it came and nearly washed us away. Indian troubles in the early days, though we made peace with the Crow eventually. She glanced at Cordelia. The frontier forges a person, Miss Nash. Burns away what's unnecessary until only the essential remains. And what's essential? Cordelia asked, genuinely curious. Courage, adaptability, and above all, the capacity to recognize a true partnership when it presents itself. Margaret's eyes held a wisdom born of long experience. No one survives out here alone, not truly. We all need someone to stand with us against whatever comes. Before Cordelia could respond to this pointed observation, Reese appeared in the kitchen doorway, his tall frame nearly filling the space. Miss Nash, he said, nodding politely. I've spoken with Walsh about your wagon. We can head out at first light tomorrow, retrieve it, and make repairs. With good weather, we could have you in Silver City by nightfall the day after. Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman. Your help has been invaluable. Something in her formal tone made his expression shudder slightly. Just doing what anyone would, he replied. If you'll excuse me, I have some preparations to make before morning. After he departed, Margaret gave Cordelia a shrewd look. That man has ridden through blizzards and tracked cattle thieves across 3 territories without complaint, but he looks at you like you're a puzzle he can't quite solve. Cordelia busied herself with drying a plate to hide her flustered response. I'm no puzzle, Mrs. Walsh. Just a woman trying to make her way. Aren't we all, dear? Margaret patted her hand. Aren't we all? That night, lying in the unfamiliar comfort of a proper bed, Cordelia found her thoughts returning again and again to Reese Zimmerman. In the span of 2 days, he'd evolved from stranger to rescuer to. What exactly? Not quite a friend, but something more than a chance-met traveling companion. There was a gravity to him that both drew and unsettled her, as if he carried within him some deep current that matched her own. Ridiculous, she chided herself. She knew nothing substantial about the man beyond his evident competence and unexpected kindness. That these qualities were increasingly rare in her experience didn't make them remarkable in themselves. And yet. She fell asleep with the memory of his steady presence behind her in the saddle, solid as the mountains themselves. Dawn came early on a ranch, and Cordelia was awakened by the sounds of men calling to one another, horses nickering, and the distant lowing of cattle. She dressed quickly in her own clothes, now cleaned and pressed by Margaret's efficient hands, and joined the household for a breakfast of eggs, bacon, and biscuits that would have fed 3 people in Denver. Reese was already at the table, dressed for travel in a clean flannel shirt and his well-worn canvas coat. He acknowledged her with a nod, his expression unreadable. Ready to retrieve your wagon, Miss Nash. More than ready, Mr. Zimmerman. They set out within the hour, Reese leading a pack horse laden with tools and supplies, including a sturdy new wagon axle. The morning was clear and cool, the mountain air crisp with the scent of pine and sage. As they rode, Reese pointed out landmarks and wildlife, his knowledge of the territory evident in every observation. Walsh told me more about Silver City, he said, as they followed a game trail that would cut hours off their journey to the pass. The town's changed since I was last there. The initial silver boom has slowed, but there's still enough activity to keep the place going. When were you there last? Cordelia asked, curious about his history with the area. A shadow crossed his face. About 5 years back, before I signed on with the Double Creek. His tone discouraged further questions, and Cordelia respected the boundary. Everyone had parts of their past they preferred not to revisit. She certainly did. They reached her wagon by midday and found it undisturbed since their last visit. While Cordelia inventoried what remained of her possessions, Reese set to work on the broken axle. He worked methodically, jacking up the wagon bed, removing the damaged parts, and preparing to install the replacement. Watching him work, his movements sure and economical, Cordelia was struck by a sudden awareness of how completely her future now depended on this man she barely knew. It was a discomforting realization for someone who had prized self-sufficiency above all else. "Can I help?" she offered, approaching as he wrestled with a particularly stubborn bolt. He glanced up, surprise evident in his expression. "Most ladies I know wouldn't want to dirty their hands with axle grease." "I'm not most ladies," she replied simply. "And I prefer to participate in my own rescue when possible." A slow smile spread across his face, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his features, softening the hard lines and bringing warmth to his eyes. "I'm beginning to realize that, Miss Nash." He handed her a wrench. "Hold this steady while I turn the bolt." They worked together through the afternoon, the physical labor creating an easy rapport between them. Cordelia proved a quick study, anticipating his needs and offering practical suggestions that earned his approving nods. By the time the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, the new axle was securely in place and the wagon stood ready for travel. "We should make camp here tonight," Reese suggested, wiping his hands on a rag. "Start fresh in the morning." "It's a hard day's journey to Silver City from this point," Cordelia agreed, helping him unload the necessary supplies from the pack horse. As they set up camp in the same clearing they'd used the previous night, she found herself appreciating the efficient partnership they'd established. There was a comfortable rhythm to their interactions now, a shared understanding that required few words. After a simple supper of beans, bacon, and coffee, they sat by the fire as darkness enveloped the mountain pass. The night was quiet save for the occasional hoot of an owl or the distant cry of a coyote. Stars emerged one by one until the sky was ablaze with their cold, clear light. "I've always loved the stars," Cordelia said softly, breaking the companionable silence. "My father taught me the constellations when I was a child. He said no matter how far we traveled, the stars remained constant, our own private map of heaven." Reese looked up, his face illuminated by the dancing firelight. "During the war on night watch, I'd study them for hours." Made the darkness less empty somehow. It was the first time he'd voluntarily mentioned his wartime experience, and Cordelia recognized the significance of the confidence. "Which regiment?" she asked gently. 7th Illinois, saw action at Shiloh, Vicksburg, Atlanta." His voice was measured, as if reciting facts about someone else's life. "Came west afterward, like a lot of men who couldn't quite find their way home again." "And have you found your way home?" He prodded the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward to join the stars. "Double Creek's as close as I've come. Walsh is a good man to ride for." He paused, then added quietly, "But no, Miss Nash, I wouldn't call it home yet." The admission, simple as it was, struck Cordelia with unexpected force. Here was a truth they shared, both adrift in their own ways, both seeking something that remained just beyond reach. "Perhaps Silver City will be home for me," she said, though her conviction sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Once I establish the claim, and if the claim doesn't pan out." Reese asked, his gaze direct across the flames. It was a question she'd avoided asking herself throughout the long journey west. "Then I'll find another path, teaching perhaps, or—" She trailed off, unwilling to articulate the limited options available to a woman alone in the territories. "You could always wrangle cattle," Reese suggested, a hint of teasing in his voice. "You've got a steady hand and a good eye. Walsh is always looking for capable ranch hands." The image of herself in denims and boots, riding the range alongside Reese and the other cowboys, startled a laugh from her. "Can you imagine the scandal? A female wrangler. Stranger things have happened out west," he replied with a smile. "I once knew a woman who ran a stagecoach station single-handed after her husband died, managed the stock changes, kept the books, and could outshoot most of the drivers when outlaws came calling. What happened to her? Last I heard, she'd married the station agent from the next stopover. They run the business together now," he shrugged. "The frontier has a way of revealing what people are truly made of, beyond the constraints of so-called civilization." "And what am I made of, Mr. Zimmerman?" Cordelia asked, surprising herself with the boldness of the question. "In your estimation," Reese studied her for a long moment, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. "Grit," he said finally. Determination, intelligence, and something else, a kind of hunger for freedom that matches the land itself. He looked away, suddenly self-conscious. But I'm just a ranch hand. My estimations don't count for much. I think they count for a great deal, Cordelia said softly, and I think you see more clearly than most. Their eyes met across the fire, and for a breathless moment, Cordelia felt as if they stood on the edge of some precipice, poised between the safe, familiar territory of casual acquaintance and something deeper, more dangerous. The moment passed when a log in the fire collapsed, sending up a shower of sparks that broke their shared gaze. Reese cleared his throat and rose to his feet. We should get some rest. Long ride tomorrow. As they settled onto their respective bedrolls, Cordelia lay awake, staring up at the star-strewn sky and wondering at the strange twist of fate that had brought Reese Zimmerman into her life. Whatever tomorrow might bring, she knew with sudden certainty that meeting him had irrevocably altered her journey and perhaps her destination as well. Morning dawned clear and crisp, the September air carrying the first hints of autumn's approach. They broke camp efficiently, loaded Cordelia's remaining possessions into the repaired wagon, and set out for Silver City. Reese rode alongside the wagon, occasionally scanning the surrounding terrain with the vigilant eye of a man accustomed to anticipating trouble. As the miles passed beneath the wagon wheels, Cordelia found herself increasingly torn between anticipation of reaching her destination and a curious reluctance to end her time with Reese. He had become, in the space of 3 short days, someone whose presence she valued, whose quiet strength and understated intelligence complemented her own in ways she hadn't expected. They stopped at midday beside a clear stream to rest the horses and share a simple meal. Sitting on a sun-warmed rock, watching Reese tend to the animals with gentle, capable hands, Cordelia found herself wondering what it would be like to have such a partner in life, someone who matched your weaknesses with his strengths, who stood beside you rather than above or below. "Penny for your thoughts," Reese said, settling beside her with a tin cup of coffee. Cordelia smiled, embarrassed to have been caught staring. "I was just thinking about Silver City, wondering what awaits me there." "Opportunity if you're willing to work for it," he replied. "The town's past its wildest days, but there's still fortune to be made for those with vision and persistence. Both of which I possess in abundance," she said with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. Reese's expression grew serious. "There's something you should know before we arrive. The Crystal Ridge district, where your father's claim is located, has seen some trouble recently. Claim disputes mostly, but occasionally more serious conflict." Cordelia's stomach tightened. "What kind of conflict?" "There's a man named Victor Holloway who's been buying up claims throughout the area, sometimes through legitimate means, sometimes through pressure. He controls most of the water access in that part of the mountains, which makes independent mining operations difficult." "And you think he might have designs on my father's claim?" Reese chose his words carefully. "I think any unclaimed or undermanned operation in that district would attract his attention, and with your father gone." "The claim isn't abandoned," Cordelia said firmly. "I have the deed and all the necessary paperwork. It's legally mine." "Law carries different weight in mining camps than it does in Eastern courtrooms," Reese cautioned. "Just proceed carefully when you arrive. Establish your presence, but don't antagonize Holloway unnecessarily." The warning cast a shadow over Cordelia's spirits as they continued their journey. By late afternoon, the trail began to widen, showing signs of more frequent use. They passed several freight wagons heading in the opposite direction, their drivers tipping their hats to Cordelia and nodding respectfully to Reese. As the sun began its descent behind the western peaks, they crested a final ridge, and Silver City spread before them in the valley below. From this distance, it appeared almost picturesque, a cluster of wooden buildings nestled against the mountainside, with mine entrances visible as dark scars in the surrounding slopes. Smoke rose from numerous chimneys, and even from here, Cordelia could make out the movement of people along the main street. "Silver City," Reese announced unnecessarily. "Population about 1,200 last I heard. 2 hotels, 5 saloons, a school, and a small but respectable church." Cordelia absorbed the sight, trying to reconcile the actual town with the image she'd carried in her mind throughout her journey. It was smaller than she'd imagined, more haphazard in its construction, but undeniably alive with activity and purpose. "It's beautiful," she said softly. In its own way. Reese glanced at her, a half-smile playing at his lips. "Most wouldn't see beauty in a mining town, Miss Nash." "Most aren't looking properly," she replied. "I see people building something from nothing, creating community in the wilderness." "There's beauty in that kind of determination." His expression softened as he looked at her. "You have a way of seeing beneath the surface, don't you?" "I try," she said simply. "Shall we?" They descended into the valley as the light began to fade, the wagon creaking beneath them on the steep grade. As they approached the outskirts of town, Cordelia became increasingly aware of the curious glances directed their way. A woman driving a wagon, accompanied by a cowboy, was evidently worthy of notice in Silver City. The main street was bustling despite the late hour, with miners coming off their shifts, merchants closing up shops, and saloon doors swinging open to welcome the evening crowd. Cordelia drove with careful dignity through the center of town, acutely conscious of Reese's protective presence beside her. "The Silver Palace Hotel would be your best option for tonight," he advised, gesturing toward a 3-story building with a freshly painted facade. "It's respectable, and the proprietor, Mrs. Whittaker, is known for looking after women traveling alone." Cordelia nodded, steering the wagon toward the hotel. As they pulled up before the hitching post, the reality of their imminent separation struck her with unexpected force. After days of shared hardship and growing companionship, she would soon bid farewell to Reese Zimmerman, perhaps forever. He dismounted and came around to help her down from the wagon's seat, his hands strong and steady at her waist. When her feet touched the ground, he didn't immediately release her, and for a breathless moment, they stood close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "Thank you," she said softly, the words wholly inadequate for all he'd done. "I wouldn't have reached Silver City without your help." "You'd have found a way," he replied, his voice rough with some emotion she couldn't name. "You strike me as a woman who doesn't let obstacles stand in her way for long." Their gazes held for a moment longer before he stepped back, breaking the connection. "I should see to your registration and help with your belongings." The lobby of the Silver Palace was modest but clean, with a polished wooden counter and a small sitting area furnished with overstuffed chairs. Mrs. Whittaker proved to be a brisk, efficient woman of middle years, who regarded Cordelia with open curiosity. "Traveling alone, Miss Nash?" she inquired as she recorded Cordelia's information in the hotel register. "Yes, though Mr. Zimmerman was kind enough to escort me into town after my wagon experienced difficulties." Mrs. Whittaker's gaze shifted to Reese, who stood a respectful distance away. "Zimmerman, from the Double Creek spread?" "Yes, madam," he confirmed with a polite nod. "Well, any friend of Harland Walsh's is welcome here," she said, her manner warming noticeably. "I'll have a boy see to your wagon, Miss Nash, and your belongings will be brought up directly. Room 212, top of the stairs, third door on the right. Breakfast is served from 6 to 9. As they ascended the stairs to inspect Cordelia's room, the awkwardness of their impending parting hung between them like an unseen barrier. The room itself was simple but comfortable, with a brass bed, a washstand, and a small writing desk positioned near the window that overlooked the main street. "It's perfect," Cordelia said, removing her bonnet and placing it on the bed. "I can't thank you enough for everything you've done, Mr. Zimmerman." Reese stood near the door, hat in hand, his posture suggesting he was ready to take his leave yet somehow reluctant to do so. "I'd like to see you settled properly before I return to the ranch," he said. "Perhaps I could call on you tomorrow, help you get oriented to the town, maybe even ride out to view your father's claim." The offer sent an unexpected thrill of pleasure through Cordelia. "I'd appreciate that very much." "Good," he nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "I'll arrange accommodations at the boarding house down the street and meet you for breakfast at 8 if that suits." "Perfectly," she replied, trying to keep the eagerness from her voice. He hesitated, seeming on the verge of saying something more, then simply nodded again. "Until tomorrow, then." "Good night, Miss Nash. Good night, Mr. Zimmerman." After he departed, Cordelia moved to the window and watched as he crossed the street below, his tall figure unmistakable even in the gathering dusk. Only when he disappeared from view did she realize she was smiling. The next morning dawned clear and full of promise. Cordelia dressed with particular care in her best remaining dress, a dove gray cotton with subtle blue piping that complemented her eyes. She arranged her chestnut hair in a simple but elegant knot at the nape of her neck, secured with her mother's silver hairpins, one of the few family heirlooms that had survived the journey. Reese was waiting in the hotel dining room when she arrived, rising from his table as she approached. He had clearly made an effort with his own appearance. His dark hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaved, and he wore a clean white shirt beneath his usual canvas coat. "Good morning, Miss Nash," he greeted her, pulling out her chair. "I trust you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," she admitted with a smile. A proper bed feels like unimaginable luxury after so long on the trail. They shared a pleasant breakfast of flapjacks, eggs, and strong coffee while Reese outlined his suggested itinerary for the day. "I thought we might start with a tour of the town so you can get your bearings. The assay office and land registry should be our first stops. You'll want to confirm your claim ownership officially. After that, if you're willing, we could ride out to view the Silverado." "That sounds perfect," Cordelia agreed. "I'm eager to see my father's claim with my own eyes." As they walked the streets of Silver City, Reese proved an informative guide, pointing out establishments of note and introducing Cordelia to several merchants and townspeople. The assay office was their first formal stop, where Cordelia presented her father's deed and mining claim documents for verification. The clerk, a thin man with ink-stained fingers and spectacles perched on his nose, examined the papers carefully. "Everything appears to be in order, Miss Nash. The Silverado is registered to Jonathan Nash as of March 1877, with all fees paid through the end of this year." He made several notations in a large ledger. "I'll record you as the current owner by right of inheritance. There's a small fee for the transfer, $2. Cordelia felt a momentary panic at the mention of money, remembering the stolen pouch that had contained her savings. Before she could speak, Reese placed $2 on the counter. "Thank you," she murmured as they left the office, her cheeks warm with embarrassment. "I'll repay you as soon as possible." "No hurry," he replied easily. "Consider it an investment in Silver City's newest mine owner." Their next stop was Hargrove's General Store, where Cordelia needed to arrange for supplies. The proprietor, a jovial man with an impressive mustache, greeted Reese like an old friend. "Zimmerman, didn't expect to see you in town." His curious gaze moved to Cordelia, and with such charming company. "George, this is Miss Cordelia Nash," Reese introduced her. "She's recently arrived to take over her father's mining claim. Miss Nash, George Hargrove runs the finest establishment in Silver City." "You flatter me, sir," Hargrove said with a chuckle before addressing Cordelia. "A pleasure to meet you, Miss Nash. Any relation to Jonathan Nash by chance?" "He was my father," Cordelia confirmed. "You knew him?" "Not well, but he was a regular customer during his time here. Serious man, kept to himself mostly, but spoke highly of his daughter back east." Hargrove's expression grew sympathetic. "I was sorry to hear of his passing." "He had high hopes for the Silverado. That's why I've come to continue his work," Cordelia explained, "though I find myself in need of supplies and somewhat limited in funds at present." Hargrove nodded understandingly. "Many folks start out in similar circumstances. I'm not averse to extending credit to those with legitimate claims and honest intentions." He glanced at Reese. "And any friend of Zimmerman's can count on fair treatment from me." As they discussed the supplies she would need, food staples, tools, household necessities, Cordelia was struck by the ready acceptance she was receiving, due in no small part to Reese's evident standing in the community. It was a stark contrast to her experiences in Denver, where she had been viewed with either condescension or predatory interest as a woman alone. By midday, they had completed their business in town and were ready to ride out to the Silverado claim. Reese had arranged for horses from the local livery, and Cordelia changed into her practical split riding skirt for the journey. The claim was located about 4 miles northeast of town, in the area known locally as Crystal Ridge. The trail grew steeper and narrower as they ascended into the mountains, but the horses were sure-footed and accustomed to the terrain. Cordelia found herself increasingly impressed by the rugged beauty of the landscape, towering pines, dramatic rock formations, and glimpses of snow-capped peaks in the distance. "The country grows on you," Reese observed, noticing her appreciative gaze. "First time I saw Montana, I thought it too vast, too empty. Now anywhere else feels crowded." "I can understand that," Cordelia replied. "There's a certain honesty to this landscape. It doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is." He smiled at her perception. "That's it exactly." As they rounded a bend in the trail, Reese suddenly reined in his horse, his expression growing alert. "Riders coming," he said quietly. "Stay behind me." Moments later, 3 men on horseback appeared on the trail ahead. They were rough-looking individuals, with the weathered faces and hard eyes of men accustomed to frontier violence. The leader, a tall man with a pockmarked face and an elaborate mustache, raised his hand in greeting that somehow managed to convey warning rather than welcome. "Zimmerman," he acknowledged with a curt nod. "Bit far from Walsh's cattle, aren't you?" "Pharaoh," Reese replied, his tone neutral but watchful, "just showing Miss Nash to her property." The man's gaze shifted to Cordelia, assessing her with cold calculation. "Nash, any relation to old Jonathan?" "His daughter," Cordelia confirmed, meeting the man's stare directly despite her unease. "I've come to claim my inheritance." Something like amusement flickered across Pharaoh's features. "Have you now? Well, that's interesting timing." He glanced at his companions, who remained silently watchful. "Mr. Holloway was just saying the other day how he'd like to acquire that particular parcel. Fits nicely with his other holdings in the area." Reese's posture shifted subtly, his hand resting casually near his holstered revolver. "The Silverado belongs to Miss Nash. All the paperwork's been verified at the assay office this morning." "Paperwork," Pharaoh repeated with exaggerated thoughtfulness. "Yes, very important paperwork, though out here in the mountains, possession counts for a good deal more, wouldn't you say?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Especially when a claim's been sitting empty for months." "It's not empty anymore," Cordelia stated firmly. "I'm here now, and I intend to develop the Silverado fully." Pharaoh tipped his hat with mock courtesy. "Ambitious, I like that in a woman, but mining's a hard business, Miss Nash. Requires capital, manpower, technical knowledge." His tone grew sharper. "And water rights, which are mighty scarce in Crystal Ridge unless you have an arrangement with Mr. Holloway." The implied threat hung in the air between them. Cordelia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain breeze, but she maintained her composure. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Pharaoh. When I wish to discuss business arrangements, I'll be sure to seek out Mr. Holloway directly." For a moment, anger flashed in Pharaoh's eyes at her dismissal, then he laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Spirited too, Mr. Holloway will find that interesting." He gathered his reins. "We'll be seeing you around, Miss Nash, count on it." With a final measuring look at Reese, he signaled to his companions and they urged their horses forward, passing uncomfortably close before continuing down the trail. Once they were out of earshot, Cordelia released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I take it those men work for the Victor Holloway you mentioned," Reese nodded grimly. "Pharaoh's his foreman and enforcer, not a man to cross lightly." He studied her with concern. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she assured him, though her heart was still racing. "Just processing the reality of frontier negotiations." "They were marking territory," Reese explained. "Letting you know that Holloway has his eye on your claim, and sending a warning to you as well, I think," Cordelia observed perceptively. "There seemed to be some history there." Reese's expression closed. "Pharaoh and I have had our differences." Before she could inquire further, they crested a rise that revealed a small clearing nestled against the mountainside. A crude cabin stood at one edge, its roof in need of repair but its log walls still solid. Nearby was the entrance to a mine shaft, its timber supports weathered but intact. A stream bubbled along the western edge of the clearing, providing a natural water source. "The Silverado," Reese announced. "Your inheritance, Miss Nash." Cordelia reined in her horse, overcome by a surge of emotion as she gazed at her father's final project. Here was the culmination of his lifelong dream, the strike that would vindicate all those years of searching. That he hadn't lived to see it fully developed struck her anew with the poignancy of unfulfilled hope. "It's smaller than I imagined," she admitted after a moment. "Size isn't everything in silver mining," Reese replied. "Some of the richest veins run narrow but deep. According to what Walsh told me, your father had found promising samples before his illness forced him to stop work." They dismounted and secured their horses before exploring the property on foot. The cabin interior was sparse but serviceable: a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed frame with a straw mattress that would need replacing, and basic cooking implements hanging from hooks on the wall. "It's not much," Cordelia said, running her hand along the table's surface, "but it's mine." The declaration held both determination and uncertainty. "It needs work," Reese agreed, "but it's solid. Good foundation, tight walls. The roof's the main concern before winter sets in." They moved on to examine the mine entrance. Reese lit a lantern he'd brought from town and led the way into the shaft, explaining the rudiments of silver mining as they proceeded. The tunnel extended about 50 feet into the mountain before reaching a working face where the veins of ore were visible as grayish streaks in the rock wall. "Your father knew what he was doing," Reese observed, examining the support timbers. "The shaft is well constructed, properly braced." He chipped at the rock face with a small pick, revealing a metallic gleam. "And that's definitely silver, good quality from the look of it." Cordelia touched the vein reverently, feeling a connection to her father in that moment. "He was right all along. There is value here. The question is whether you can extract that value before Holloway finds a way to take it from you," Reese said bluntly as they emerged back into the sunlight. "Mining requires manpower, Miss Nash. You'll need at least 3 or 4 good workers to operate even a small claim like this effectively." "And where does one find trustworthy miners in Silver City?" she asked, pragmatic as always. "That's the challenge. Many work for the larger operations, Holloway's included. Independent miners are few and often already committed." He hesitated, then added, "There are some retired miners in town who might be willing to advise you, perhaps even work part-time." They spent another hour exploring the property boundaries, with Reese explaining the importance of water access and identifying potential problems. The stream that ran along the edge of the claim provided sufficient water for basic needs, but larger-scale mining operations would require more, and that's where Holloway's control of the area's water rights became a serious obstacle. As the afternoon waned, they prepared to return to town. Cordelia stood for a moment on the porch of what was now her cabin, trying to imagine a life here: the solitude, the hard work, the challenges of establishing herself in a man's world. It was daunting, yes, but also exhilarating in its possibilities. "What are you thinking?" Reese asked, coming to stand beside her. "That I have no idea what I'm doing," she admitted with a rueful smile, "but I'm going to do it anyway." He chuckled, the sound warm in the cool mountain air. "That's the spirit that built the West, Miss Nash." Magnificent ignorance followed by stubborn determination. "Is that how you came to ranching?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Something like that," he acknowledged. "After the war, I drifted, tried my hand at prospecting, freight hauling, even dealt cards for a while. Ranching stuck because it offers a kind of freedom within structure. The work is hard but straightforward. No ambiguities, no shifting ground. Unlike mining, the unspoken comparison hung between them. The ride back to Silver City was quieter, each lost in their own thoughts." The encounter with Pharaoh had cast a shadow over Cordelia's initial enthusiasm, forcing her to confront the practical challenges that lay ahead. By the time they reached town, the sun was setting, painting the western sky in dramatic hues of orange and gold. They stabled the horses and walked together to the hotel, the streets now bustling with evening activity. Miners fresh from their shifts filled the saloons, while merchants closed up shops and families gathered for supper. It was a community in full swing, vibrant despite its rough edges. At the hotel entrance, they paused, the moment of parting upon them once again. "Thank you for today," Cordelia said sincerely. "For everything." Reese shifted his weight, suddenly awkward in a way she hadn't seen before. "I should be heading back to the Double Creek tomorrow," he said. "Walsh will be expecting me." "Of course," she replied, ignoring the sinking feeling his words produced. "You've already done far more than could be expected." "I was thinking," he continued, not quite meeting her eyes, "that I might speak with Walsh about taking some time to help you get established at the Silverado. The cabin needs work before it's properly habitable, and after meeting Pharaoh today." He trailed off, then straightened his shoulders. "It doesn't seem right, leaving you to face that alone." Warmth bloomed in Cordelia's chest at his offer. "I wouldn't want to take you from your responsibilities. Walsh owes me time off," Reese said with a small smile, "and he's not a man to leave a neighbor in difficult straits, especially a lady facing someone like Holloway." "Then I would be grateful for your help," she admitted. More than grateful, in fact. His expression softened as he finally met her gaze directly. "Have dinner with me tonight. There's a decent restaurant just down the street, nothing fancy, but the food's good." "I'd like that very much," Cordelia replied, unable to suppress her smile. As they walked toward the restaurant, side by side in the gathering dusk, Cordelia felt a curious sense of rightness, as if the broken wagon axle that had brought Reese Zimmerman into her life had been not misfortune but providence. Whatever challenges lay ahead at the Silverado, she would face them with this steady, capable man beside her, at least for a time. And perhaps a hopeful voice whispered in her heart for longer than that. The next week passed in a whirlwind of activity as Cordelia and Reese worked together to make the Silverado cabin habitable. True to his word, Reese had ridden to the Double Creek the morning after their dinner and returned the following day with Walsh's blessing, and a wagon loaded with supplies donated by the generous rancher and his wife. "Walsh says to consider it a welcome gift," Reese explained as they unloaded lumber, tools, and household necessities at the cabin. "He and Margaret have a soft spot for determined newcomers." With Reese's guidance and labor, the cabin quickly transformed. They repaired the roof, replaced the broken window panes, built a proper bed frame, and constructed shelves and storage spaces that made the small interior feel more organized and homey. Cordelia worked alongside him, learning to drive nails, saw lumber, and mix mortar for the stone fireplace. "You're a natural," Reese observed on their fourth day, watching as she confidently repaired a section of chinking between logs. "Most city women would be horrified by the state of their hands after this kind of work." Cordelia glanced at her palms, now calloused and occasionally smudged with dirt despite regular washing. "My father raised me to value capability over appearance," she said. "Besides, I find satisfaction in tangible results." In the evenings, they would sit on the newly repaired porch, sharing simple meals cooked over the fireplace and watching the sunset paint the mountains in ever-changing colors. Their conversations ranged widely from literature to politics, from Reese's wartime experiences to Cordelia's memories of her father's restless pursuit of mining success. Gradually, the initial formality between them eased into a comfortable companionship. Reese and Cordelia replaced Mr. Zimmerman and Miss Nash with a naturalness that neither remarked upon but both quietly celebrated. They developed an easy rhythm of work and rest, each anticipating the other's needs and preferences with growing accuracy. On their sixth day at the Silverado, they ventured into the mine shaft to assess what would be required to resume operations. Reese's experience with basic mining techniques proved invaluable as he explained the process of following the vein, supporting the tunnel, and extracting the ore. "The silver content here is promising," he noted, examining samples they'd collected. "With a small crew of experienced miners, you could begin producing meaningful quantities within weeks. If I can find such men," Cordelia reminded him, "and if Holloway doesn't interfere." They had seen no sign of Pharaoh or his men since their initial encounter, but both were acutely aware that the reprieve was likely temporary. Reports from their weekly trips into Silver City for supplies confirmed that Victor Holloway was indeed interested in acquiring the Silverado and was not a man accustomed to having his ambitions thwarted. He controls most of the Crystal Ridge district already, the assayer informed them during one visit. Bought out the Widow Parker last month and Old Simmons the month before that. Offers fair prices, I'll give him that, but doesn't take kindly to refusals. Has he used force? Cordelia asked directly. The assayer's hesitation was answer enough. Let's just say those who have stood in his way have encountered difficulties. Mysterious equipment failures, workers who suddenly find employment elsewhere, supplies that don't arrive as scheduled. The warning was clear, and it added urgency to their preparations. With Reese's connections in town, they managed to secure the services of two retired miners, Harold Benson and Tom McPhee, who agreed to work part-time at the Silverado in exchange for a share of the proceeds once production began. They're good men, Reese assured Cordelia after introducing them. Experienced, honest, and neither beholden to Holloway. Benson worked your father's claim briefly before his illness, so he's familiar with the layout and the ore quality. By the end of the second week, the cabin was fully habitable. The mine shaft had been inspected and reinforced where necessary, and a basic operation plan had been established. Sitting at the table after dinner on what was to be their last evening before the official commencement of mining operations, Cordelia felt a profound sense of accomplishment mingled with apprehension about the future. We've come a long way from a broken wagon axle in the pass, she observed, pouring coffee for them both. Reese accepted his cup with a smile that had become increasingly frequent in recent days. Indeed we have, though I can't say I regret that particular misfortune. Nor I, Cordelia admitted, meeting his gaze across the table. It seems Providence had other plans for us both. The word us hung between them, laden with unspoken possibilities. Over the past 2 weeks, their growing friendship had developed undercurrents that neither had openly acknowledged, but both increasingly felt. Small touches that lingered, glances that held meaning beyond words, moments of shared silence that communicated more than conversation ever could. Cordelia, Reese began, setting down his coffee cup, there's something I need to tell you about my past, about Silver City. The serious note in his voice immediately captured her full attention. I'm listening. He took a deep breath, his hands clasped before him on the table. 5 years ago, I was here in Silver City, not as a ranch hand or a visitor, but as a federal marshal. Of all the revelations she might have expected, this ranked among the least anticipated. A marshal, after the war, I joined the marshal's service. Spent 3 years tracking fugitives throughout Montana territory. His expression grew distant. I was good at it, too good, perhaps. The job changes a man, makes him hard in ways that aren't always visible until it's too late. Cordelia remained silent, sensing he needed to tell this story in his own way, at his own pace. I was assigned to Silver City to investigate a series of claim disputes that had turned violent, 3 miners dead, others run off their land. He met her eyes directly. Victor Holloway was at the center of it, though nothing could be proven directly. He was careful, used men like Pharaoh to do his dirty work, maintained his reputation as a legitimate businessman. What happened? Cordelia asked quietly. I got close to building a case. Too close. His jaw tightened at the memory. They ambushed my informant, a young miner who'd witnessed a murder committed by one of Holloway's men, killed him and his wife in their cabin, burned the place to the ground. Horror filled Cordelia at the brutality of the act, and Holloway was responsible. I knew it, everyone knew it, but proving it? Reese shook his head in frustration. The only witness was dead, and Holloway had the town judge and mayor in his pocket. When I continued pushing, there was an attempt on my life bullet missed my heart by inches. Unconsciously, his hand moved to his left side, where Cordelia now realized a scar must lie beneath his shirt. After I recovered, my superiors decided the situation was too volatile. They transferred me to Wyoming territory, but I'd had enough by then. Turned in my badge, drifted for a while, eventually signed on with Walsh at the Double Creek. His gaze was steady as he concluded. I tell you this because Holloway will remember me even if he doesn't show it, and when he discovers I'm helping you with the Silverado, it will complicate matters. Cordelia absorbed this revelation, understanding now the tension she'd sensed in him since their arrival in Silver City. "Why did you come back? Why risk helping me knowing the danger?" A muscle worked in his jaw as he considered her question. "When I found you in that mountain pass with your broken wagon, I had no intention of returning to Silver City. But then," he paused, searching for words. "Getting to know you, hearing about your father's claim, I realized I couldn't in good conscience send you into Holloway's territory unwarned and unprotected. And once we arrived, leaving felt increasingly impossible." "Because of your sense of justice?" she asked softly. His gaze softened as it held hers. "That was part of it, but only part." The admission, simple as it was, set Cordelia's heart racing. Before she could respond, however, the sound of approaching horses broke the moment. Reese was on his feet instantly, moving to the window with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to danger. "3 riders," he reported, his voice now hard and focused. "Coming up the main trail. Could be Benson and McPhee, but they weren't expected until morning." He moved to the door, checking his revolver as he did so. "Stay inside," he instructed Cordelia. "Not likely," she retorted, retrieving her father's Colt from its place near the door. "This is my property, and I'll defend it alongside you." A flicker of admiration crossed his features before he nodded curtly. "Stay behind me, at least initially. Let me see who we're dealing with." They stepped onto the porch just as the riders came into the clearing. Even in the fading light, Cordelia recognized Pharaoh's distinctive silhouette, accompanied by 2 of Holloway's men she'd seen in town but hadn't met. "Evening, Marshal," Pharaoh called mockingly as they reined in before the cabin. "Oh, pardon me, it's just Mr. Zimmerman now, isn't it?" How the mighty have fallen. Reese's expression revealed nothing as he stood at the top of the porch steps, his hand resting casually near his holstered weapon. "State your business, Pharaoh." "Just a friendly visit to our neighbor," Pharaoh replied with exaggerated courtesy. "Mr. Holloway sends his compliments to Miss Nash and wishes to discuss a business proposition regarding the Silverado." "Any proposition can be presented during business hours in town," Cordelia stated firmly, stepping forward to stand beside Reese. "Not at dusk on private property." Pharaoh's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Holloway prefers direct negotiation. He's prepared to offer you $5,000 for the claim, a generous sum considering its undeveloped state." "The Silverado isn't for sale," Cordelia replied without hesitation. "Please convey my thanks to Mr. Holloway for his interest, but inform him that I intend to develop the claim myself." A flicker of annoyance crossed Pharaoh's features. "That's an unwise position, Miss Nash. Mining is a complicated business. Equipment breaks, supplies get delayed, workers find better opportunities elsewhere. A woman alone might find it particularly challenging." "She's not alone," Reese stated quietly, the menace in his tone unmistakable despite its softness. Pharaoh's gaze shifted to him, cold calculation in his eyes. "For now, perhaps, but you're a hired hand, Zimmerman. The Double Creek will be calling you back soon enough. And then what?" His attention returned to Cordelia. "Mr. Holloway's offer won't remain open indefinitely. I suggest you consider it carefully before misfortune befalls your operation." "Is that a threat, Mr. Pharaoh?" Cordelia asked directly, merely an observation about the uncertainties of frontier enterprise. He touched the brim of his hat in mock salute. "We'll call again in a few days for your answer. Mr. Holloway is a patient man to a point." With that, he wheeled his horse and departed, his men following in his wake. Once they were out of sight, Cordelia released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Well, that was unpleasant. "And predictable," Reese added grimly. "Holloway's opening move, a seemingly generous offer backed by veiled threats." He guided her back inside the cabin, securing the door behind them. "He'll escalate from here." "What would you advise?" Cordelia asked, setting her revolver on the table. Reese considered the question as he stoked the fire. "If you're determined to keep the claim, and I sense that you are, then we need to accelerate our plans. Get the mine producing as quickly as possible, establish your presence as legitimate and permanent. And if Holloway moves against us more directly, then we defend what's yours," he replied simply. I may have turned in my marshal's badge, but I haven't forgotten how to handle men like Pharaoh. Something in his tone made Cordelia study him more carefully. You're staying, then. Beyond helping me get established, he met her gaze directly, all pretense gone from his expression. If you'll have me, yes. I've spoken with Walsh. He's willing to hold my position at the Double Creek, but he understands my interest in seeing the Silverado succeed. Your interest, Cordelia repeated softly. Is it only the Silverado that interests you, Reese? The question hung between them, charged with possibilities neither had dared voice until now. Reese moved toward her slowly, as if giving her time to retreat if she wished. When she remained in place, meeting his gaze steadily, he reached out to take her hands in his. You know it isn't, he said quietly. From that first day in the pass, when you faced a broken wagon and approaching darkness with nothing but determination and a loaded Colt, I've been. He paused, searching for the right words. Drawn to you, your courage, your intelligence, your unwillingness to surrender to circumstance. Cordelia felt her heart accelerate as he continued, his voice deepening with emotion. I told myself it was just admiration, then respect, then friendship. His thumbs traced gentle patterns on the backs of her hands. But it's become something more, Cordelia, something I haven't felt in a very long time, perhaps ever. I feel it too, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. This connection between us, it's unexpected and yet somehow inevitable. His smile at her words transformed his face, softening the hard lines of experience into something approaching joy. Inevitable, he repeated. Yes, that's it exactly. When he leaned down to kiss her, it felt indeed like the inevitable conclusion to a journey that had begun with a broken wagon axle in a mountain pass. His lips were gentle against hers, tentative at first, then more certain as she responded. His hands released hers to frame her face with tender reverence, while hers found their way to his shoulders, feeling the solid strength beneath his shirt. The kiss deepened, expressing all they'd left unspoken during their days of working side by side. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Reese rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if memorizing the moment. I should have done that days ago, he murmured. Cordelia laughed softly. We've been rather busy. He chuckled in response, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her where their bodies remained close. True enough, and it seems we'll be busier still in the days ahead. The reminder of Holloway's threat sobered them both, but didn't diminish the warmth of their newfound closeness. Together, they returned to the table, hands still linked, to discuss practical strategies for establishing the Silverado operation and defending against whatever obstacles Holloway might place in their path. As they talked into the night, making plans and considering contingencies, Cordelia felt a profound sense of partnership unlike anything she'd known before. Whatever challenges awaited them, and she harbored no illusions that they would be few, she would face them with this remarkable man beside her, his strength complementing hers, his determination matching her own. The following weeks brought both progress and escalating tensions at the Silverado. With Benson and McPhee's experienced help, mining operations commenced in earnest. The vein of silver proved as rich as initial samples had suggested, yielding ore of sufficient quality to justify regular trips to the assay office in Silver City. Cordelia established herself as the claim's proprietor and business manager, keeping meticulous records, arranging for supplies, and negotiating fair prices for their silver. Her natural intelligence and quick learning ability impressed even the skeptical old miners, who gradually came to respect her judgment and leadership. Reese divided his time between security concerns and practical mining assistance. He reinforced the cabin's defenses, established regular patrols of the property boundaries, and maintained vigilant watch for any sign of Holloway's interference. At the same time, he worked alongside Benson and McPhee in the mine shaft, his strength and endurance making him a valuable addition to their small crew. Holloway's response to their success was predictably underhanded. First came minor annoyances, delayed deliveries, rumors spread in town about the Silverado's instability, attempted intimidation of potential workers. When these proved ineffective, the tactics escalated. Mining equipment was damaged during a night raid that Reese narrowly failed to prevent. The stream that provided their water was temporarily dammed upstream, forcing them to travel further for essential supplies. Through it all, Cordelia maintained her determination, refusing to be intimidated or discouraged. Her growing relationship with Reese provided both emotional support and practical partnership as they faced each new challenge together. Their evenings were now spent not only in practical planning, but also in the gentle exploration of deepening affection, shared confidences, tentative touches, and increasingly passionate embraces that spoke of a future neither had anticipated but both now desired. One evening in late October, about a month after Holloway's initial offer, Cordelia returned from town with news that changed their calculations significantly. "The railroad's coming," she announced as she entered the cabin, her cheeks flushed with cold and excitement. "The territorial governor signed the agreement yesterday. Construction begins in the spring, and Silver City will be a primary stop." Reese looked up from the map he'd been studying, instantly grasping the implications. "That changes everything. Property values, mining economics, transportation costs. And explains Holloway's increased interest in acquiring as many claims as possible in this area," Cordelia added, removing her coat and gloves. The assayer said Holloway was present at the signing ceremony, apparently quite pleased with the announcement. "He would be," Reese agreed grimly. "He's been positioning himself to capitalize on exactly this development." He studied Cordelia thoughtfully. "This will make the Silverado even more valuable and Holloway more determined to have it." She nodded, moving to warm her hands by the fire. "Farrow approached me in town today. Holloway's raised his offer to $7,000. Her tone made it clear she'd rejected the proposal outright. Reese joined her by the fire, his expression troubled. "He won't stop there. The railroad news will only increase his urgency." He took her hands in his touch gentle despite the calluses earned from weeks of mining work. "Cordelia, we need to consider our options realistically. Holloway controls most of the local officials, has more men at his disposal than we can hope to counter, and now has even greater financial motivation to acquire your claim. Are you suggesting I sell?" She asked, surprised and slightly wounded by what seemed like a retreat from their shared determination. "Never," he assured her quickly, "but we need stronger allies and a more defensible position both legally and practically." He hesitated, then continued with careful deliberation. "I've been corresponding with my former superior in the Marshal's service. The territorial governor's involvement with the railroad project has brought increased federal scrutiny to this region, including concerns about Holloway's methods of acquiring property." Hope flickered in Cordelia's expression. Federal intervention? Possibly, but not immediately. These investigations move slowly, especially with Holloway's local influence. He squeezed her hands gently. "In the meantime, I believe we should consider a partnership with Harland Walsh." The suggestion wasn't entirely unexpected. Walsh had maintained contact throughout their weeks at the Silverado, sending occasional supplies and expressing interest in their progress. His extensive ranch holdings gave him significant influence in the region, perhaps the only local power that rivaled Holloway's in certain respects. "What kind of partnership?" Cordelia asked pragmatically. "Walsh has the resources to help develop the Silverado properly: equipment, manpower, political connections. He suggested a 50-50 arrangement that would leave you with full ownership of the claim, but share the development costs and profits." Reese watched her carefully as he added, "He's also offered me a position as supervisor of the mining operation, should you agree to the partnership." Cordelia absorbed this information, her practical mind weighing the advantages against her desire for complete independence. "And what do you think of this proposal?" she asked finally. "I think it offers the best chance for the Silverado to succeed while keeping it out of Holloway's hands," Reese replied honestly. "Walsh is a fair man who values independence. He wouldn't interfere with your management of the claim, only provide the resources needed to defend and develop it properly." She nodded slowly, recognizing the wisdom in his assessment. "And the position he's offered you, Would you accept it? Something in her tone made him study her more intently. That depends entirely on you, Cordelia. On me. On whether you see a future for us beyond this current struggle with Holloway. On whether the feelings that have grown between us these past weeks mean as much to you as they do to me. His voice deepened with emotion as he continued, because I won't accept any position, partnership, or proposal that doesn't include the possibility of building a life with you. The declaration, simple but profound in its implications, brought tears to Cordelia's eyes. "Reese Zimmerman," she said softly, "are you asking to court me properly?" A smile warmed his features. "I believe I am, yes, though our circumstances have hardly been conventional from the start." "No," she agreed with a smile of her own. "Not since the moment my wagon axle snapped in that mountain pass." She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw with tender affection. "And I wouldn't change a moment of it." He turned his head to press a kiss against her palm. "Is that a yes to my question?" "It's a yes to everything," she replied simply. "To the partnership with Walsh, to your position as supervisor, and most especially to building a life together, whatever form that may take." The joy that transformed his expression was answer enough as he gathered her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the emotion words could not contain. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, he rested his forehead against hers in what had become a familiar gesture of intimacy. "Holloway won't surrender easily," he cautioned, ever practical despite his evident happiness. "Let him come," Cordelia replied with the quiet confidence that had first drawn Reese to her. "We'll face whatever comes together as partners in every sense." In the weeks that followed, their personal happiness provided a foundation of strength as they formalized the partnership with Harland Walsh and expanded operations at the Silverado. Walsh's resources proved invaluable: additional workers, better equipment, legal representation in Silver City, and perhaps most importantly, the political influence to counter some of Holloway's local control. True to Cordelia's prediction, Holloway didn't surrender his ambitions easily. His tactics grew increasingly desperate as he saw the Silverado developing into a significant operation under the new partnership. There was a night attack on the mine entrance that was repelled by Reese and Walsh's men, an attempt to bribe the assayer to undervalue the Silverado's ore, even a legal challenge to Cordelia's inheritance that was quickly dismissed by the territorial court. Through it all, Cordelia and Reese's relationship deepened and strengthened. They worked side by side during the day, she managing the business aspects while he supervised the mining operation, and spent their evenings planning both the Silverado's future and their own. What had begun as an unlikely chance meeting in a mountain pass had evolved into a partnership based on mutual respect, shared values, and a love that grew more certain with each passing day. By mid-November, with winter's approach adding urgency to their preparations, two significant developments altered the landscape of their struggle with Holloway. First came word from Reese's contact in the Marshal's service that a formal investigation had been opened into Holloway's business practices, focusing specifically on allegations of intimidation and fraud in acquiring mining claims. The second development was more personal but equally momentous. On a crisp evening with the first snow dusting the mountaintops, Reese formally proposed marriage to Cordelia on the porch of the Silverado cabin, the same porch they had defended together against Holloway's men, the same porch where they had shared their first kiss. "I can't offer you the ease or refinement you might have found in Denver," he said, holding her hands as they stood beneath the star-filled Montana sky. "But I can promise to stand beside you through whatever life brings, to honor your strength and independence while offering my own to complement it." "That's all I've ever wanted," Cordelia replied, her voice steady despite the emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. "A true partnership with a man who sees me as I am and values what I bring to our shared life." Their wedding took place 2 weeks later in Silver City's small church, with Harland and Margaret Walsh standing as witnesses and most of the town in attendance. The celebration afterward at the Silver Palace Hotel represented a public declaration of the Silverado's legitimacy and success a message not lost on Victor Holloway, who watched from a distance as the community embraced the new couple. The final confrontation with Holloway came, ironically, not through violence or intimidation, but through the legal system he had so often manipulated to his advantage. The federal investigation, bolstered by evidence Reese had quietly gathered during his months at the Silverado, resulted in multiple indictments against Holloway and his associates, including Farrow. Facing ruin and possible imprisonment, Holloway fled the territory, leaving his empire to be dismantled by creditors and the courts. The properties he had acquired through questionable means were returned to their rightful owners where possible, or sold at fair market value to repay his substantial debts. By the spring of 1879, as the first railroad surveyors arrived in Silver City, and the Silverado mine reached full production under the Walsh-Nash partnership, Cordelia and Reese had established themselves as respected members of the community. Their cabin, expanded and improved during the winter months, became a center of hospitality for miners, ranchers, and travelers passing through the Crystal Ridge district. On a warm evening in late May, they sat together on their porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Cordelia's hand rested protectively over her slightly rounded abdomen, where their first child had recently made its presence known. "I was thinking," Reese said, his arm around her shoulders, "that when the baby comes, we might build an addition to the eastern side of the cabin, a proper nursery with large windows to catch the morning sun." "Always planning ahead," Cordelia observed with an affectionate smile. "Though I suppose that's what brought us together in the first place, your foresight in helping a stranded traveler with a broken wagon axle," he chuckled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "One of the wisest decisions I ever made. And the other?" she asked, leaning into his embrace. "Asking you to marry me, of course." His hand covered hers where it rested on her abdomen. "Everything good in my life stems from those two choices." As twilight deepened around them, and the first stars appeared in the vast Montana sky, Cordelia reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment of contentment. What had begun as misfortune, a broken wagon axle in a mountain pass, had led to the greatest happiness she had ever known. A thriving business, a loving husband, a child on the way, and a future filled with possibilities neither could have imagined when they first met. "Do you ever wonder," she asked softly, "what would have happened if my wagon hadn't broken down that day, if our paths had never crossed?" Reese considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "I believe some meetings are destined, regardless of circumstance," he said finally. "If not the broken axle, then some other twist of fate would have brought us together." Cordelia smiled at his unexpected romanticism. "My practical husband, speaking of destiny." "Even the most practical man recognizes providence when it appears in his life," Reese replied, drawing her closer as the evening chill descended. "And you, Cordelia Zimmerman, are the most providential occurrence of my existence." As they sat together in the gathering darkness, secure in their love and the life they were building, the memory of their first meeting seemed both distant and immediate, a moment frozen in time that had set in motion all that followed. The wagon axle had indeed snapped in the pass, and the cowboy had said she would ride with him till morning. Neither could have foreseen that till morning would extend into a lifetime together, a journey of love and partnership that had only just begun.